They looked at me like I was already defeated, like I was nothing more than a broken girl standing alone in a cold courtroom in America. My own stepmother stood there with fake tears, telling the judge that I had lost my mind, that I was unstable, that I could not be trusted with my own life, and for a moment even I felt the weight of their lies crushing my chest. But then something happened, something no one in that courtroom expected. The judge paused, his hand stopped midair as he flipped through the file. His eyes narrowed, his voice changed, and in that silence the truth I had buried for years finally began to rise, and in that moment everything changed. My name is Seraphina Blake, and I was not always the girl people whispered about in courtrooms. I was not always the girl labeled unstable, broken, or dangerous. Once I was just a normal girl growing up in a quiet American town where dreams felt possible and life seemed simple. My father was my world. He was a strong, kind man who built everything with his own hands. He used to tell me that strength was not about never falling, but about rising every time the world tried to bury you, and I believed him with all my heart. But everything changed the day he died. It happened suddenly, without warning, a car accident on a rainy night, and just like that, the only person who ever truly protected me was gone. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, my hands shaking, my heart refusing to accept what the doctor had just said. The world around me became silent, like someone had pulled me out of reality and thrown me into a void, and in that void something inside me cracked. That was the day my stepmother Vanessa truly revealed who she was. At first, she acted like she cared. She hugged me, she cried in front of others, she played the role perfectly, but behind closed doors everything changed. Her voice became cold, her eyes empty. She would look at me like I was a burden, like I was something she had to tolerate. Rather than love, she started controlling everything: my school, my friends, my life. She isolated me slowly, piece by piece, until I felt like I had no one left. She would whisper things to me late at night, telling me I was weak, telling me my father would be disappointed in what I had become, telling me I was the reason he was gone. And those words, they sank deep into my mind like poison. I was young and broken, and I started to believe her. Years passed, and the emotional weight became heavier every single day. I tried to speak out. Once I tried to tell a teacher what was happening, but Vanessa was always one step ahead. She painted me as unstable, as dramatic, as someone who created stories for attention. And slowly people began to believe her version of me instead of the truth. By the time I turned 18, I was no longer the girl I once was. I had become quiet, withdrawn, constantly questioning my own thoughts, constantly wondering if maybe I really was broken the way she said I was. And then came the moment that changed everything. Vanessa decided she wanted full control over my inheritance. My father had left everything to me, his house, his savings, everything he had worked for, and she could not accept that. She needed a way to take it from me, and that was when she created the most dangerous lie of all. She filed a case in court claiming I was mentally unstable, claiming I was incapable of managing my own life, claiming I needed to be placed under her guardianship. I remember the day I received the notice, my hands trembling as I read the words over and over again. It felt unreal, like a nightmare I could not wake up from. I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight, but a part of me was still that broken girl who had been told for years that she was nothing. The courtroom was cold the day of the hearing, the air heavy with judgment. As people looked at me, whispering behind their hands, I could feel their eyes on me like they had already decided who I was. Before I even spoke, Vanessa stood confidently beside her lawyer, her expression calm, controlled, like she had already won. When it was my turn to speak, my voice felt trapped inside my chest. My words came out weak, uncertain, and I could see it in their faces. They believed her. Vanessa spoke with practiced emotion, her voice shaking at just the right moments, her tears falling perfectly as she described me as unstable, as dangerous, as someone who needed help. She told them I had episodes. She told them I could not be trusted. She told them I was a risk to myself and others. And the worst part was that I started to doubt myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I was not strong enough to fight this. Days turned into weeks as the case continued, and with every hearing it felt like I was losing more of myself. I stopped sleeping, I stopped eating, I felt like I was fading. But then something unexpected happened. I found a box hidden in my father's old study, a box Vanessa had tried to keep locked away. Inside it were documents, letters, and recordings, things I had never seen before, things that told a completely different story. My hands shook as I went through them, each piece revealing a truth that Vanessa had tried to bury. My father had known what she was like. He had documented everything, her manipulation, her lies, her behavior. He had even recorded conversations where she admitted her intentions. And suddenly everything became clear. I was not broken. I had been manipulated. I had been controlled. I had been silenced. But not anymore. That night, something inside me shifted. The fear that had lived in my chest for years began to burn into something else, something stronger, something unbreakable. I realized that the girl I used to be was still there, buried under years of pain, waiting for the moment to rise again. And that moment had come. The next court hearing felt different. The air was the same, the people were the same, but I was not the same girl who had stood there before. This time I walked in with something I had not felt in years: certainty. Vanessa smiled when she saw me, that same confident smile she had worn since the beginning, like she had already won, but she had no idea what I was about to do. When the judge called my name, I stood up, my heart steady, my hands no longer shaking, and for the first time I looked directly at him without fear. I told him I had evidence. The room shifted slightly, whispers spreading as Vanessa's expression changed just for a second, a crack in her perfect mask. I handed the documents to my lawyer, who passed them forward, and as the judge began to read, I watched his face carefully. I saw the moment his expression changed. I saw the moment doubt replaced certainty. Then came the recordings. The sound of Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom, clear, undeniable, as she spoke about her plans, as she admitted to manipulating me, as she laughed about how easy it was to make others believe I was unstable. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Vanessa tried to interrupt, she tried to explain, she tried to twist the narrative, but it was too late. The truth was no longer hidden. For years I had been trapped in her version of reality, but now the world was seeing the truth. The judge removed his glasses slowly, his eyes fixed on the evidence in front of him, and then he looked at me, not with doubt, not with judgment, but with understanding. In that moment, I felt something I had not felt in years: validation. The decision was made quickly after that. The case against me collapsed, Vanessa's claims dismissed, her credibility destroyed, and just like that, the control she had over my life was gone. But the real victory was not the legal outcome. The real victory was reclaiming myself. I walked out of that courtroom a different person, not because the world had changed, but because I had changed. I was no longer the girl who believed she was broken. I was the girl who had survived, who had fought, who had risen. The road ahead was not easy, healing never is, but for the first time in a long time I felt free. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I went back to school, I found my voice again, I learned to trust myself, and slowly the shadows of my past began to fade. People who once doubted me began to see me differently, not as the girl who was broken, but as the girl who refused to stay broken. And Vanessa. She became nothing more than a chapter in my story, a reminder of what I had overcome. Years later, I stood in front of a room full of people sharing my story, helping others who felt trapped, who felt silenced, who felt like they were losing themselves. I told them what I had learned, that strength is not about never falling, it is about rising every time the world tries to bury you. Because the truth is this: they can call you broken. They can try to silence you. They can try to rewrite your story. But they do not get to decide who you are. Only you do. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one truth, one decision to change everything. That courtroom was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. And I am no longer afraid to be heard. The next time I stepped into that courtroom, I was not the same girl they had seen before. My name is Seraphina Blake, and for the first time in years, I felt something rising inside me that I had almost forgotten existed. Strength, not the kind that shouts or demands attention, but the kind that stands still and refuses to break. The air felt heavy again, the same cold silence, the same judgment in their eyes. But this time I did not lower my gaze, I did not shrink into myself. I stood there, and I let them see me. Vanessa was already there, standing beside her lawyer, perfectly composed, like always, her expression calm, her posture confident, like she had already won everything. She looked at me and smiled, that same controlled smile that used to make me feel small, that used to make me doubt my own reality. But this time it did not work. This time I saw through it clearly. I saw the calculation behind her eyes. I saw the fear she was trying to hide. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The sound of chairs moving echoed through the room as we took our seats again. My heart was beating, but it was steady, not frantic, not broken, steady, like it finally understood that it did not need to run anymore. When the hearing began, Vanessa's lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth, confident, carefully crafted to paint me as unstable again. He spoke about my past, my supposed emotional instability, my isolation, my behavior. He used words designed to create doubt, designed to make me look like someone who needed control, someone who could not be trusted with her own life, and for a moment I could feel the old version of me trying to come back, that small voice inside whispering, what if they believe him, what if you lose again? But I did not let that voice take control this time. I stayed grounded. I remembered the truth I had found. I remembered the evidence I carried, and most importantly, I remembered who I really was beneath everything she had tried to turn me into. When it was my turn, my lawyer stood up and nodded at me, a quiet signal that it was time. I took a slow breath and stepped forward. Every step felt deliberate, like I was reclaiming a piece of myself with each movement. I could feel the eyes on me again, but they felt different this time, like they were waiting, not judging, waiting to see what I would say. My voice when I spoke was calm, clear, steady. It did not shake, it did not break, it carried something new, something real. I told them I had evidence that everything said about me was not the full truth, that there was more that needed to be seen. There was a pause in the room, a shift, almost like the energy itself had changed. Vanessa's posture stiffened just slightly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. That was the first crack. I saw the first sign that she knew something was wrong. My lawyer presented the documents first, the papers my father had hidden, the notes, the records, everything he had carefully collected over time. The judge took them and began to read slowly, carefully, his expression unreadable at first, but then it started to change. His eyebrows pulled together slightly, his lips pressed into a thin line, and I knew in that moment that something was reaching him. Vanessa's lawyer objected immediately, his voice louder, now more aggressive. He tried to dismiss the documents, he tried to question their validity, he tried to regain control of the narrative, but the judge raised his hand and silenced him. That single motion shifted everything. Then came the recordings. The room became completely still as the first audio began to play. The sound of Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom, clear, unmistakable, and impossible to deny. She was laughing softly, speaking casually about how easy it was to manipulate people, how simple it was to make others believe I was unstable, how she had been planning to gain control over everything my father left me. Every word she spoke felt like a chain breaking inside me. Every sentence pulled another piece of truth into the light. I did not look at her while it played. I did not need to. I could feel her composure collapsing without even turning my head. Gasps echoed quietly through the room, whispers followed, but I stayed focused, my eyes on the judge, watching every reaction, every shift in his expression, and then I saw at the moment everything changed. He removed his glasses, slowly placing them on the desk in front of him. His gaze sharpened, his attention fully locked onto the evidence in front of him, and then he looked at me, not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with something else, something I had not seen before, understanding. Vanessa tried to speak, she tried to interrupt, her voice rising, now desperate, no longer controlled. She claimed the recordings were taken out of context. She tried to twist her words into something else, but it did not work. The calm mask she had worn for years was gone, replaced by panic, by fear, by the realization that she had lost control. The judge listened to everything without interruption, his face serious, his presence firm, and when the final recording ended, the silence that followed felt different, not heavy, not suffocating, but final, like the truth had settled into every corner of that room. He spoke then, his voice measured and clear. He addressed the inconsistencies in Vanessa's claims. He pointed out the manipulation, the intent, the pattern that was now impossible to ignore. He acknowledged the evidence, not just as information, but as truth. And just like that, everything shifted. The case that had once been built against me began to collapse piece by piece. Every argument Vanessa's side had made now felt empty. Every accusation now looked like a reflection of her own actions instead of mine. When the decision came, it felt almost unreal, like something I had imagined too many times to believe it was finally happening. The judge ruled against Vanessa completely. Her request for guardianship denied, her claims dismissed, her credibility shattered in a single moment. But what stayed with me the most was not the ruling, it was what he said after. He looked directly at me and acknowledged my strength. He recognized what I had endured, what I had survived, and for the first time in years, someone in a position of authority saw me for who I really was, not the version created by lies, but the truth. I did not cry, not in that moment. I just stood there, breathing it in, letting it settle, letting it become real. Vanessa was escorted out, her voice still raised, her protests ignored, her presence no longer powerful, no longer controlling, just another person who had been exposed by her own actions. I watched her leave, not with anger, not with hate, but with something quieter, something stronger, closure. When I walked out of that courtroom, the world felt different, the air felt lighter, like something that had been pressing down on me for years had finally been lifted. I stepped outside, and for the first time in a long time, I looked up at the sky, and I did not feel trapped, I did not feel broken, I felt free. The days that followed were not easy. Healing is never immediate, the scars do not disappear overnight, but something inside me had changed permanently. I no longer questioned my reality, I no longer doubted my worth. I began to rebuild my life piece by piece, slowly, carefully, but with intention. I returned to my studies, I reconnected with parts of myself I had lost. I started speaking about what I went through, not for sympathy, but for strength. I wanted others to understand that what happened to me was not just my story, it was something many people face in silence: manipulation, control, emotional abuse hidden behind closed doors. People began to listen, not because I was loud, but because I was real. My story reached others who felt the same, who had been told they were broken, who had been made to doubt themselves, and I saw in their eyes the same spark I had found again. Years later, I stood in another room, but this time it was not a courtroom, it was a stage filled with people who came to hear stories like mine, stories of survival, of truth, of reclaiming identity, and as I stood there looking out at them, I realized something powerful. That girl who once stood alone in a courtroom being called broken had become someone who could stand in front of hundreds and speak without fear. I told them everything, not just the pain, not just the struggle, but the truth that came after. That strength is not something you are born with, it is something you build through every moment you refuse to give up. I told them that people will try to define you, they will try to label you, they will try to control your story, but they do not get the final say. Because the truth is simple. You are not what they say you are. You are what you choose to become after everything they tried to do to you. And sometimes the moment they think you are completely broken is the exact moment you begin to rise. My name is Seraphina Blake, and this is not a story about being destroyed.